Welcome to the pod Biomanufacturing and Fermentation Technology. In this episode, we translate microbial science, process engineering, and manufacturing realities into insights that scale.
Welcome to the debate. When you pour concrete for a massive industrial foundation, it sets, right? It becomes permanent.
Yeah, literally and financially.
Exactly. So if you're building a massive biomanufacturing plant and you misjudge market demand by, say, even 10%, that vast concrete footprint isn't just supporting your business anymore. It becomes a tombstone for your company.
It absolutely drags the whole enterprise under. I mean, you're talking about sinking $100 million into a field somewhere, just hoping the world actually wants thousands of tons of your custom enzyme or organic acid.
Right. And today we are arguing over the ultimate survival question in the modern bioeconomy. Do you build that massive concrete fortress to aggressively crush your production costs? Or do you build a fleet of agile modular lifeboats to survive unpredictable markets? I'll be making the case that agility, modularity, and, crucially, keeping your capacity utilization high is really the only sane way to scale a modern biology company.
And I'll be arguing the counterpoint. Because look, flexibility is a great survival tactic early on, sure. But if you actually want to dominate a mature commodity market, you eventually have to build the fortress. You need the absolute cost leadership that, frankly, only a massive, centralized flagship facility can provide.
Let's start with what we often call the valley of death, the first 18 months of commercialization. You have this genetically engineered microbe that makes something amazing in a lab flask. How do you get it to market without going bankrupt before you even sell your first kilogram?
Well, you certainly don't start by pouring concrete. Even I agree on that. You usually start with a capital-light CDMO launch.
Right, a CDMO, a contract development and manufacturing organization. For those operating outside the manufacturing bubble, a CDMO is essentially a massive facility for hire. You pay them to brew your product in their tanks.
Yep.
The traditional business analogy is that it's like renting an apartment in a new city before buying a house, but I don't think that quite captures the operational nightmare, does it?
Not at all, no. Using a CDMO is much like renting an apartment and much more like asking a massive commercial bakery to use your grandmother's highly sensitive sourdough recipe.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? Like, sure, you avoid buying the million-dollar commercial ovens yourself, but your specific yeast is going to behave very differently in their giant vats. I mean, their ambient humidity is different. The way their mixing paddles shear the liquid is different.
And adjusting your precise biological recipe to fit their physical machinery is what we call tech transfer, which is neither fast nor cheap.
It's agonizing. Tech transfer can cost you between $500,000 to $2 million per site.
Per site? Yeah.
Exactly. You aren't just handing over a USB drive with brewing instructions. You have to align your regulatory standards, and you have to adapt your organism's behavior to their specific bioreactor geometries. And let's talk about the premium you pay just to use their space.
Well, it varies, but
a CDMO is typically charging you like an $8 to $25 per kilogram production cost for bulk metabolites. That includes a 30 to 60% premium over what it would theoretically cost to make it yourself. You are bleeding cash every time they run a batch.
wait, but that premium is the temporary, right? It's the literal price of speed?
It's a temporary bleed that can kill a startup because it creates a dangerous vulnerability. If you're paying a 60% markup, your competitors who control their own internal production can systematically underprice you while you just, bleed out paying rental fees.
I see the risk, sure.
How long can a company survive paying 30 to 60% premiums, plus millions in tech transfer fees, before they're forced to bring it in-house? The Techno-Economic models show you need a minimum volume of 200 to 500 tons a year just to justify bringing the critical steps back internally.
I hear that, but let's look at the alternative reality of those first 2 years. Yes, a tech transfer costs up to $2 million, but that is a known, capped variable. You budget for it, you pay the high $25 a kilo, but you hit the market instantly.
With terrible margins.
You target a gross margin of maybe 30 to 50% just to stay afloat, and you are effectively buying speed with margin dilution. Most importantly, your process uncertainty collapses before you ever commit to a $50 million facility.
But you still have to insource eventually. I mean, you have to take over the tricky biological steps, like the seed train.
Right. Let's define seed train really quickly because it sounds like agriculture, but it's physically very different.
Go ahead.
So the seed train is the incredibly delicate process of waking up your microbes. You start with a tiny frozen vial from the lab, you grow it in a small flask, then you transfer it to a slightly larger tank, and you keep stepping up the volume until you have enough active biomass to actually inoculate a massive industrial fermenter.
And if you mess up the physical transfer in the seed train, the whole commercial batch fails.
Exactly. The whole thing. And then there's the downstream processing, which is essentially the complex industrial plumbing required to filter, purify, and extract your final chemical out of that messy microbial soup.
Which is a massive bottleneck.
It is. So yes, you eventually insource those bottlenecks. But by operating with the CDMO-first strategy, you hit break even at just 150 to 300 tons per year. You survive the riskiest phase of commercialization with zero capital expenditure debt hanging over your head.
Surviving the first 2 years is great, but surviving is not the same as winning.
Okay, what is winning then?
Winning? If your goal is true market dominance, if you are making industrial enzymes or organic acids, you are in a commodity market. You eventually need to supply upward of 1,000 to 3,000 tons per year to be a real player.
That's a lot of volume.
Right, and at that volume, the math simply does not support your capital-light, agile model. You eventually have to build the single, large-scale flagship facility.
The concrete fortress, $50 to $150 million in capital expenditure.
Exactly. Massive 50 to 200 cubic meter fermenters. And yes, the payback period on that investment stretches out to 5 to 8 years. But here is the mechanism that makes it unbeatable at steady state. It's integration and automation.
Meaning everything is connected.
Yes. When you build a single massive plant, your upstream process, the fermentation tanks, is perfectly physically hardwired into your downstream processing. It's a continuous, fully automated symphony.
Which drastically drops your labor costs.
Precisely. A massive plant might take 50 people to run. 20 tiny decentralized plants might take 500 people to run. Because of that labor efficiency and the massive scale, your mature production cost drops to just $2 to $6 per kilogram.
Wow, 2 to 6?
Yeah. That is how you build an impenetrable strategic moat. If we are competing for a massive global offtake agreement and my production cost is $3 a kilo while yours is $8, I will take your market share every single time.
Well, that makes perfect sense on paper, but that assumes you can keep that massive facility completely full. Let me give you a different perspective on how steady state is rarely as steady as the spreadsheets claim. Your entire $2 to $6 cost premise relies on keeping that giant plant running at greater than 70 to 80% utilization, right?
Of course. I mean, empty stainless steel doesn't generate revenue.
And that is the utilization trap. The data clearly identifies underutilization risk as the single biggest threat to flagship economics. If you build a massive 100 cubic meter plant, but demand fluctuates or the market cools, and you only run it at, say, 40% capacity.
Well, you adjust your operations.
No, your fixed overhead costs will absolutely destroy your margins. The math is punishing here. That massive half-empty plant is actually less profitable than a modest 20 cubic meter modular network running at 85% capacity.
A modular network? You mean the plug-and-play biopods concept?
Yes, exactly. Think of it as biomanufacturing as infrastructure. Instead of pouring concrete for one giant plant, we deploy standardized prefabricated skids. These are 5 to 50 cubic meter fermentation units that contain both the upstream tanks and the initial downstream filters in one box.
So you just stamp them out.
Right. You scale out rather than scaling up. You get a payback period of just 2.5 to 4 years and a really low breakeven of 50 to 150 tons per module.
I appreciate the appeal of that agility. I really do. But let's look at the physical reality of what you're proposing. Managing a decentralized network of biological manufacturing sites across different regions introduces profound operational complexity.
In what way?
Biology is notoriously finicky. Even if these biopods are highly automated, you are dealing with different local water chemistry, different ambient temperatures, and massive contamination risks across 20 different regional sites.
But we manage that through centralized process intelligence. The digital controls monitor the biology in real time.
Digital controls can't change the physical fact that you are duplicating your equipment at every single site. You're buying 20 industrial centrifuges instead of one giant one. Even with optimized continuous operations, your modular production cost is going to sit at $4 to $10 a kilogram.
Which is still competitive.
It's higher. You simply cannot touch my flagship cost. Furthermore, if you are building a flagship, you don't build it on speculation. You build it because you have strong off-take agreements. You already have a guaranteed buyer for thousands of tons. In that scenario, demand fragmentation isn't your primary concern.
But what if you are making a logistics-heavy product, say biosurfactants for industrial cleaning or specific agricultural proteins?
Those products are often shipped in liquid form, which means they are mostly water.
Okay, fair point.
If your flagship plant is in Ohio, but your customers are clustered in Europe and Asia, shipping thousands of tons of water across oceans destroys whatever margin you supposedly saved by centralizing production. Building a massive plant is a dinosaur strategy in those contexts.
So you build closer to the customer? Exactly. The modular approach lets me physically install a biopod right next to the customer's facility, or right next to a regional corn mill to secure a cheap supply of sugar.
I'll grant you the logistics argument. Moving water is a terrible business model. But let's talk about the actual fermentation physics, because I know you want to bring up process intensification.
I do, I really do. And I want to pause here because this next concept, continuous fermentation, completely broke my mental model of how manufacturing works when I first read it.
It is certainly a paradigm shift from how the industry has operated for the last 50 years.
Traditionally, biomanufacturing is batch or fed batch. You fill a giant tank with nutrients, drop in your microbes, wait a week for them to eat the sugar and produce your target chemical.
Right.
Then you drain the entire tank, spend days scrubbing, cleaning, and sterilizing it with heavy steam, and start all over again. It's incredibly inefficient.
There is a massive amount of downtime.
Right. But continuous fermentation changes the physics of the tank. You constantly flow fresh liquid nutrients in one side, and you constantly siphon off the finished product and waste from the other side.
So no draining and scrubbing every week.
Exactly. The microbes just stay in the tank and keep working indefinitely. The data shows this gives you a 2 to 5 times productivity increase.
It forces the biology to work significantly faster.
Right. And if the biology is working 5 times faster, I don't need a massive 100 cubic meter tank anymore. I can produce the exact same total annual tonnage in a 20 cubic meter tank.
Which shrinks the footprint.
It drastically reduces the physical reactor volume required to hit your targets. This completely undercuts your argument that we strictly need large-scale flagship facilities to achieve volume. The economic shift directly away from the massive fortress and into making modular, continuous biopods the clear winner.
That is a compelling biological argument, I'll give you that. But have you considered the physical alternative of retrofitting brownfield facilities?
You mean buying old factories instead of building new ones?
Specifically, converting idle ethanol plants or legacy brewery facilities. You keep framing my flagship model as requiring a $100 million greenfield project, starting from a literal grassy field, laying pipes, and pouring a new foundation over 5 years.
Well, usually that is the case.
But what if we bypass the empty field entirely?
By stuffing a modern precision bioprocess into a rusty beer factory?
They aren't rusty. The physical infrastructure at those sites is incredibly valuable. The heavy industrial power lines, the massive utility water connections, the waste management systems, it's all already permitted and built.
Okay, sure. The utilities are there.
If we retrofit a brownfield, we achieve a massive 30 to 60% reduction in capital expenditure compared to building from scratch. We simply drop our upgraded stainless steel bioreactors into their existing grid.
And that saves time too.
It speeds up commissioning by 12 to 24 months.
I secure the massive scale, I get the $2 to $6 per kilogram cost structure, and I completely neutralize your biggest critique regarding the slow speed to market and the high capital debt.
Okay, that works beautifully on a spreadsheet, but let's explain why forcing a modern bioprocess into an old ethanol plant is usually an engineering nightmare.
I mean, there is some friction, certainly.
It is massive friction. You can't just dump precision-engineered, genetically modified microbes into a legacy vat designed for standard yeast. An old ethanol plant has entirely different aeration capacities.
Will you upgrade the aeration?
But it's not that simple. The advanced microbes we engineer today often need massive amounts of oxygen pumped through the liquid. The old pipes have the wrong geometries for the advanced steam-in-place sterilization we require today. You end up finding structural rigidities, literally dead legs in the piping where bad bacteria can hide, multiply, and ruin $1 million batch.
That's a worst-case scenario.
It happens all the time. Retrofitting often uncovers so many hidden limitations that you spend just as much time and money trying to fix the old plant as you would have spent building a new one perfectly designed for the task.
You're highlighting the absolute worst-case retrofits, but point taken. Greenfield gives you absolute control, brownfield gives you speed with engineering risks, and modular gives you geographic flexibility. But this brings us to the reality of how these successful bio companies actually operate once they mature. They almost never pick just one absolute extreme.
No, they don't. And this naturally leads us to the strategic synthesis from the material, the hybrid anchor plus overflow strategy. I think this is where the industry is truly heading for markets that are scaling rapidly but still have unpredictable demand spikes.
It is a very elegant compromise. It appeals to investors who are terrified of massive capital debt, but who still demand proof that the company can control its own manufacturing margins.
Under the hybrid strategy, you don't build a massive 100 cubic meter flagship. Instead, you build a mid-scale anchor facility, let's say between 20 and 80 cubic meters of capacity.
Which requires a much more digestible capital expenditure, maybe $15 to $40 million instead of the $100 million mega plant.
Right. And you use this anchor facility to handle your baseline, completely predictable demand, the volume you absolutely know you can sell every month. Because you own the facility, your internal production cost is very healthy, around $3 to $8 a kilogram.
Okay, but what happens when demand spikes?
Well, here's the critical trick. You do not overbuild the facility to handle potential future growth or seasonal demand spikes.
Because overbuilding leads to empty tanks, which leads right back to the utilization trap we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Instead, when you get a sudden spike in demand, or you land a new client, you route that peak overflow to your external CDMO partners.
Which creates a blended cost structure.
Yes. You blend your cheap internal production cost with a slightly more expensive $5 to $12 CDMO overflow cost. The beauty of this is that your overall break-even point drops dramatically. You hit break-even at a much safer 300 to 800 tons per year, rather than needing thousands of tons just to keep the lights on in a flagship fortress.
And from an operational standpoint, it is a brilliant risk mitigation strategy. Dual sourcing your own product reduces your supply chain vulnerability immensely.
Right, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. If your anchor facility goes down for routine maintenance, or, heaven forbid, a batch gets contaminated and you have to shut down and steam sterilize the whole plant, your CDMO network ensures you don't miss a single delivery to your core customers. It recognizes that in a scaling market, you need both margin control and flexibility.
It seems we found our common ground.
Temporarily, perhaps. I will concede that the hybrid model is the smartest transitional phase for a scaling biocompany. But I will still argue that if the market continues to expand, if your baseline demand eventually crosses that massive 3,000-ton threshold, even the hybrid model will face the ruthless economic pressure to consolidate into a larger, dedicated flagship facility. Cost leadership always wins in the end.
And I maintain that as biology gets better, as continuous fermentation and process intensification drive those massive productivity gains, we are going to need less physical steel to produce the exact same amount of product. If we step back and look at the broader discourse today, the defining lesson is that the modern bioeconomy requires aligning your capital deployment meticulously to your demand visibility.
Absolutely. If your demand is uncertain, starting with a CDMO and transitioning to a hybrid model is mathematically the safest path. You de-risk the early stages brilliantly,
But if you have locked in massive commodity offtake agreements and your process is fully de-risked at the demo scale, hesitating to build flagship economics is simply a concession of market leadership.
I think we have successfully established that there is no universal one-size-fits-all answer to biomanufacturing. The optimal strategy relies entirely on matching your specific biological realities to the right economic model. If you are dealing with regional demand fragmentation, localized biopods provide an incredible advantage.
And we haven't even touched on some of the more exotic strategies in the material today, like co-locating your facility directly attached to an agricultural supplier to slash your raw material costs by 20%, or pure out-licensing models where you scale with near-zero capital by simply collecting royalties on your microbe.
Yeah, we will definitely have to save the licensing deep dive for another time. But think back to that massive concrete foundation we discussed at the beginning. The ultimate question facing biomanufacturers today isn't just how much concrete to pour. It's whether you actually need to pour it at all, or if a fleet of agile, interconnected vessels might just navigate the turbulent waters of the bioeconomy far better than a stationary fortress. Thank you for joining us, and we leave it to you to decide which strategy best suits your own technological and market realities.
You've been listening to Biomanufacturing and Fermentation Technology with Prasad Urnala. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, keep engineering biology into reliable manufacturing.